Thanks everyone for coming, and welcome to this session about digital democracy. It's really a pleasure for me to be here. This is bringing together two worlds that are really important to me. I've written two books, both about things about the future of democracy, and one of them is inspired by Brazil and the other by Taiwan. And so this is really a convergence of two very different worlds for me. It's really coming at the perfect moment. I think technology is reshaping politics in this country more than it's ever done any time in the past. I'm sure you all have been reading in the news about a certain vision for how technology can reshape politics. And that's an interesting possibility, but not necessarily everyone's perspective. And there are other models out there around the world for how that can happen, how that's happened in the past, how it's, in many ways succeeded, and that are, I think, equally bold, equally as exciting, and quite different, really involving citizen participation, ways that the government could be more transparent to people and encourage them to help transform the government. And really the goal of this session today is to expose you to what those experiences have been. And I'm, joined in doing that by two of the most remarkable people in the world who have been part of that. In particular, we have Ronaldo Lemos from Brazil. Brazil is kind of the OG of democratic innovation, digital democratic innovation. And I'm really excited for him to share the experiences there with open source software, with participatory budgeting, with democratic experiments. He's one of the leaders of the Institute for Technology and Society there, which is the leading NGO in the country doing experiments in that space. And we also have Audrey Tang, who's become my closest collaborator. She's the former digital minister of the country, now their cyber ambassador. And she's also really central to a whole web of different global reform movements for technology. Most recently, Project Liberty, which is trying to buy TikTok and transform it into sort of a public utility for the people, the people's bid for TikTok. So we're really excited to have the two of them join us and tell us about, from very different parts of the world, how technology can help transform government, democracy, participation, and citizen empowerment. So I want to go through some questions to sort of draw some of these things out from both of them individually, and then have a little conversation. And then really the most exciting part is I want to give lots of time for you all to bring your experiences and questions to bear. So why don't we go ahead and play the trailer to give you a feeling for Audrey's experience, and I'll follow up with some questions. This is a film that we've made about Audrey's life. It's coming out on Sunday. It'll be available freely online. And here's a little advertisement.
Across the world, democracy is on a decline.
Authoritarianism is on the rise.
Global freedom has eroded for the 18th consecutive year. Audrey Tang, what is your greatest hope for democracy across the globe?
That people see democracy as a social technology, something that people can construct together, that they can improve in the here and now. We can code up political systems.
The Sunflower Movement was a real turning point for Taiwan's democracy.
When the Sunflower Movement happened, I said to my colleague, I have to leave now, democracy needs me. I brought a very long cable for internet connection. I live streamed through Twitter. Everybody saw it is possible for democracy to evolve, to come up with novel policies simply by asking the people, what should we do together? I was born with a heart defect, and one day I just fainted. I woke up in a hospital, and they told me the hole in my heart has grown. I could die. This awareness that everything can be reset tomorrow reminds me of Taiwanese democracy. We can't lose our democracy just with a couple missiles.
I think there's a lot that the world can learn from Taiwan. The US is running on a 250-year-old operating system. There's a strong desire to move beyond this and properly rethink from first principles. What would democracy in the 21st century actually look like?
We can make the government more open to the public. It'll be easier for people to access the data, to analyze it, transparency.
Audrey has created the opportunity to make Taiwan the most exciting constitutional democracy in the world.
I think it's a very critical moment. China really wants to invade Taiwan.
祖国统一是历史必然。
You're sitting on a place that is the flashpoint if there's going to be World War III. And yet there's calm in the eye of the hurricane. And that calm, I think, emanates from all that Audrey's done.
We can become co-creators of our democratic system, reconfiguring society in a way that is more transparent, more inclusive, more fair.
Thank you. So for those of you who are interested, please check out plurality.net, where you'll be able to watch the movie on Sunday. And also you can see our free open source book that we wrote together last year. But Audrey, we're at a moment when the centrality that technology and tech leaders can play in transforming government is very clear to people. But you became, almost a decade ago, the first digital minister of Taiwan, and arguably the digital minister with the broadest portfolio until, depending on how you characterize the current situation in the US. So it would be great if you could sort of compare your experience in Taiwan with some of the things that are going on now in the US in terms of the role of technology in government.
Yes, certainly. In 2014, as you have seen in the trailer, the Taiwanese people was not really happy about how the government was run. The approval rate of the president at the time was 9%, not very high. And people really took matter to our own hands when we occupied the parliament peacefully for 3 weeks in March that year. But the thing is that we always portrayed ourselves as not just protesters who are against something, but rather demonstrators who are showing a different possibility. So it's not just to say the trade deal with Beijing needs to go. It's nothing like that. It is getting 500,000 people on the street and many more online to every day look at our differences, but also figure out what's the uncommon ground. What is the rare common ground that people in all the different sides can manage to agree on when it comes to trade deals with Beijing and with other countries? And so every day we would read the common ideas, the ones that are still divisive, and then the next day we converge a little bit more until 3 weeks later we agree on a set of ideas that the Speaker of the Parliament, Wang Jinping at the time, simply said, okay, the people's ideas are better, and so go home, we're going to take in those ideas. So it's one of the very rare occupies that succeeded. So to Glenn's question, when I went into the cabinet as the digital minister in Taiwan, Mandarin, 数位 means both digital, but also means plural. So I was also the minister for plurality, for collaboration across diversity. And so although that we did work on government efficiency ideas, for example, the direct filing system for tax, income tax, that reduced the time it spends from 3 hours on average to 3 minutes on average. We did that in a very participatory way. Instead of just me ideating what should be done, we basically ask everybody who are fed up with the old tax filing experience what would be a better, a more fair experience. And anyone who have strong opinions are invited to just draw the experience together. So without actually occupying government's buildings in 2016 and afterwards, we replicated the same effort in an online way, and using the idea of working with the people, not just for the people, we were able to go through these kind of reforms without overly centralizing power. We did that by sharing the power with the people.
Yeah, and one phrase that both you and this current U.S. situation has used a lot is radical transparency. I was wondering what does radical transparency mean in the way that you applied it in Taiwan?
Yeah, certainly. So just for the record, it means to make the government and specifically how I conduct my cabinet position, including all the lobbyist visits, all the media interviews, and some of the internal meetings that I chair. We publish 2 weeks after each meeting the entire transcript to the public domain so that the investigative journalists, people who want to run data analysis, and so on, if you go to sayit.archive.tw, you can see my conversations with 8,000 people over more than 2,000 such occasions. And it also made all the pre-trained AI models very intimately familiar of how I see things. But basically, because it's in the public domain, it means that people can see the why and how of policy making, not just the what of the policies made. And so we don't mean making citizens transparent to the state. We believe in, of course, the right to free expression as well as the right to privacy. But we think the way that the state works need to be transparent to the people.
And Ronaldo, as I mentioned, Brazil, as much as Taiwan was ahead of the curve, Brazil was like on this stuff maybe even 30 years before Taiwan, maybe even before you were, an adult. So could you just tell us about some of those really pioneering ways that Brazil has thought about citizen participation and use of technology for that?
Absolutely, Glenn, and it's really great to be talking about this besides Audrey Tang and you. Brazil was a dictatorship for more than 20 years. So the first experiment we had with participation was actually drafting our new constitution in 1988. At that time, there was no internet available in Brazil and probably anywhere else easily. And we did that by letters. So people used to send thousands of letters to Congress, basically making suggestions about how the Constitution should look like. And it was amazing. It was something that people really took very dearly to themselves. And the Constitution itself allowed for a lot of provisions to promote this type of participation. So in Brazil, you can actually suggest a originated law from public signatures, and Congress has to take that formally and decide about it. But the things got really interesting after internet, when it came 1995 onwards. Brazil adopted a free software very early. So from 2000 to 2010, that was the golden age of participatory tools. So you had wikis. We have Rebecca McKinnon here from Wikimedia. The candle is still burning. And you have Brazilians really appropriating these open source tools in order to do civic things. So from my side, we appropriated all this, wikis, WordPress, Slashdot, and everything that was basically available. And we built a law out of it. We wrote Brazil's internet law, which is still now very well regarded as one of the most important examples of how an internet law should look like, because it protects freedoms, freedom of speech, net neutrality, privacy, and so many different things, governmental transparency, and so on. And instead of that law being written by a group of people in Brasilia, our capital, it was actually a public consultation online, absolutely transparent. If you are a company or a librarian, you had to go through the same channel to propose your suggestions. And the participation was massive. So everyone basically felt that that law was representing their ideas, and they felt part of that particular legislation. It took 7 years, it's important to mention. Democracy works, but it takes a lot of work in order for it to actually happen. And when the law was approved, it was also influential outside of Brazil. So Italy followed Brazil's steps in creating a sort of a Bill of Rights. France created the Digital Republic, which was an open process as well. Mexico and so many other different countries. The problem is, when we completed the law, we felt like, let's do this again for everything else. And in 2012, we tried to do the same to reform Brazil's copyright law and also to reform Brazil's data privacy laws. So we created public consultations and so on, and they failed miserably because people had learned how to game the system. They created bots, fake accounts, they created coordinated and authentic behavior, and every consultation that we tried after that was a huge failure. And we thought like, oh, the dream is over, we can never do it again, until we saw what Audrey was actually doing in Taiwan. And we said, the dream is not over. The candle is still burning. And we have to think about technology, about to make governments more responsive, transparent, and actually participatory.
Yeah, you talked about the dream, and I actually think that's a great way to pivot, because I think on the one hand, Brazil is obviously an economic and, governmental powerhouse, but it's also maybe more than anything, a cultural powerhouse. And Brazil has, for better and sometimes for worse, engaged in a lot of really ambitious experiments with culture, whether it be bossa nova and dance and so forth, or, Brasilia and, imagining smart in a city. And a lot of imagination about the future. So like, the Museum of the Future, Museu de Amaral, right? In Rio is another great example. Could you talk a little bit about sort of Brazilian culture and how it's been involved with thinking about the future?
Yeah, and I'm sorry for that because I will digress it will last only 2 minutes, okay? But the thing about Brazil is that it proves that modernism can emerge from different places. So Brazil has a very strong modernity that can be viewed in Bossa Nova with A Girl of Ipanema, in the Brasilia buildings. And I think this is very exciting because usually we see modernity as something that happens only in a few places. And there's something else about Brazil in the context of artificial intelligence, which is there's a lot of debate now about what we'll have to do if jobs disappear, right? Jobs are formative, so people describe themselves by what they do for work. So there's a lot of worry that people will lose their purpose if they don't have jobs anymore. Now in Brazil, we are really great to do things in our idle time, in our free time. So I think Brazil will have a very important role to play in a context like that, because there is one thing that Brazilians love, which is free time. Like we get creative, we do social experiments, we do carnival, we compose new songs, we create new movies. So the more free time Brazilians have, the more we flourish. And I really think, and I'm very serious now, that Brazil will have a role to play if jobs disappear because of AI and everything.
Could both of you guys talk a little bit about other places around the world other than Taiwan and Brazil where you think really exciting things are going on in this space?
Yeah, so I think we demonstrated last year in Taiwan how to overcome the bot problem. We held, and this is on the background, in 2020 already, our approval rate is back to over 70% because people do trust the process of finding this uncommon ground. And so one way to overcome the bots is to send SMS to random citizens. So we sent to 200,000 random numbers in Taiwan with this official number 111 and asking just one simple question. There's deepfakes advertisements. In Taiwan, it's always Jensen Huang, the NVIDIA guy, trying to sell you some crypto or some stocks. And if you click it, it's Jensen talking to you, but it's deepfake. And so we asked people what to do about it without overstepping in like government censorship, which we never tolerate in Taiwan. And so they gave us many ideas, but instead of taking 7 years, it just takes 7 minutes now using language models to do what we call sense making, to make sense of what everybody has ideas, have this uncommon ground, as well as the clusters of people who have different values and so on. And so thousands volunteered, and 450 people met online in 45 rooms of 10 people each, and then AI facilitated their conversation. So for example, one room will converge on the idea saying, it should be default as scam unless Jensen Huang signs off on that advertisement. Another room would say, if somebody gets scammed out of $5 million, Facebook need to be liable for that $5 million instead of paying a fine because they just pay the fine. And the other room would say, if they don't pay the fine, then we slow down connection a little bit to Facebook servers so their business goes to YouTube, and so on and so forth. And so none of this is censorship or Section 230 or First Amendment violation, but they together came to a very good package that we call broad listening. So instead of broadcasting a set of ideas, this is getting everybody's ideas in real time using language models, and it became law very quickly. The consultation was in March. It became law already in May. It was fast-tracked through. So this year, when you open Facebook or YouTube in Taiwan, you don't see those fake scams as advertisements anymore. Now, this idea of broad listening has been taken by Takahiro Ano-san in Japan, who ran for governor just 1 month before the closing of the election, before the voting day. And his platform is essentially, let's crowdsource the platform. And so anyone can call in to a voice number and talk to a voice clone, an AI avatar, basically, of Ano-san. And there's a 24/7 VTuber version of him just live streaming. So you can call in, suggest your policy, and if your suggestions resonates well with other people, it became his new version of a platform, and he will announce that update in the live stream on YouTube. And so after a few weeks, again, independently ranked, his platform got the highest score over even the Koike, the existing governor's score. Of course, Koike still won the election, but Ano-san won the most votes ever by anyone under 40, and now become advisor to GovTech and orchestrates this Talk to Koike campaign where everybody can talk to the governor, and that's the broad listening. And somewhere across the Pacific, another governor, Newsom of California, just a couple of weeks ago announced engaged California at the same idea about broad listening, again, on a very urgent topic of how to recover from the wildfire in Eaton and Palisade in LA, and more topics afterwards. There's also imagine the Better Bowling Green, Kentucky. That's a consultation that's going on, again, with this idea of uncommon ground, broad listening, and AI-based sense-making. So we're now seeing a new wave that instead of the public servants as small language models trying to parse through all those letters, using AI in a way that's purely assistive, so that it can be grounded in the individual ideas that people have and resonance people have with each other on the conversation networks, without hallucinations, but without the AI stepping in to replace any human's role. It is purely just to make the broad listening more to scale.
What about you, Ronaldo? What are some of your favorite examples from abroad?
There's so many different things happening. I like very much the example of Estonia, what they did in terms of building a digital infrastructure for citizenship and actually making everything open source so that other countries can actually take a look. India has also created this thing called the India Stack. So every country that doesn't have the capacity to make investments in building digital identities and how governments work digitally can basically use their open source framework in order to basically create this out of a box.
Brazil's done its own version that's similar to that, right?
Yeah. Brazil, it's done interesting things. In the past, I think open source was the most important thing from 2000 to 2010. Every year in Porto Alegre, there used to be the Free Software Forum. And I think Audrey was there for one of those events, really back in time. And the important thing is open source now is coming back because of AI. And I think at least myself and others are working so that Brazil and different countries can actually participate in the AI evolutions and revolutions by participating in the AI open source movements. And this is extremely important because right now what we're seeing is a sort of only a few countries being capable of doing research about AI. And this worries me a lot. So one thing that I've been trying to create is a sort of a global consortium for acquiring compute power. so that other countries can actually participate in AI research as well. Not only countries, universities as well. 10 years ago, 80% of AI research was actually made by universities. Now it's less than 2%. So only private companies are actually doing research in cutting edge AI. And that has to be changed. So we are inspired by Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines. They put together the procurement power of different governments in order to acquire vaccines. And now more than 90% of children are actually vaccinated through that because they are capable of making the price really go down and the quality and speed of delivery of vaccines really go up. And how about we do that for compute power? Like, why don't we acquire the necessary infrastructure for doing that and make a consortium so that that infrastructure is actually available for countries that are not the ones basically capable of doing those investments right now?
I think another thing like that is that there's a lot of personal computer capacity sitting around that could be shared.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
With the right security and networking, that's an alternative to cloud. So that's another very interesting possibility. But I wanted to turn away again from the hard politics a little bit towards the spirit of this festival, which is culture. And what do you think is the role of cultural institutions, cultural festivals, stories, and art and so forth in helping make this sort of thing possible?
It's interesting because Audrey and you wrote a book called Plurality, and myself and others were on the other side of the world, and we basically got inspired by the work of this professor called Yuk Hoy that writes a lot about this idea of techno-diversity. And we immediately understood that it's very important that we resist convergence to one single model. We need, instead of convergence, we need multiplicity. And we need divergence in the way that we think and apply technology. And the reason for that is that we have to avoid a technological monoculture. I come from Brazil, so I know about monoculture a lot. We have a lot of them in Brazil. And the problem with monoculture is that they're always on the verge of collapse. If you don't invest all the time in pesticides, in GMOs, and keeping a lot of work to keep the monoculture going, it basically collapses on its own by pests and by blight. And it's the same for everything else. If we converge to one single type of technology deployment, we will be much more frail and fragile than we are right now. And we will have to make these insane investments for that technology to keep going. And I think we have to resist that. So the techno-diversity model and that what we propose, I think it dialogues really well with the plurality that you guys propose, so that we can promote diversity for the sake of resilience. And that for me is absolutely important.
And Audrey, how do you think about the role of culture and art and communication? And
Yeah, I mean, the whole reason that we're going through the route of creating a film, and now in Japan, there's also manga. In the UK, there's also Yamado's novel. The name's called Any Human Power, right? To this plurality idea is that it shows not just how badly wrong a dystopic, technological singularity wherein AI improves itself and, takes over and see us as competing species. I mean, we have all seen the sci-fi, but instead of just showing what could go wrong, it shows what can go right. When there's a horizontal diffusion of capabilities. Instead of a monoculture, we can celebrate the conflicts that stems out from the diversity and see those as fire underground, not to be put out, but rather as fuel to co-create new things, like to new engines and so on. So the old sci-fis like Star Trek and so on does that beautifully. And I think there is such a tradition in the creative creators and so on to imagine better futures in a way that's, as some people call, through utopia. So it's not dystopia, it's not utopia. It is through this collaborative imagination that we can imagine a better future, but it's not perfect because perfect forecloses future creativities, which is why this film is called Good Enough Ancestor, because a perfect ancestor robs descendants of creativity, but a good enough one just offers it as raw material.
Yeah, I often think that for all the talk that we have about the challenges with politics in the last decade, maybe the really sad moments in my life were really at the late '90s when Star Trek stopped running and Epcot at Disney stopped being about the future. They shut down the future elements of it, and it just became about Disney characters. Because I think that's a moment when we sort of, at least for a while, gave up on the project of making a popular cultural imagination of the future and let it instead be just like, obscure science fiction books that were read by a few technologists and taken in weird directions. So I think that there's a huge role for people who want to build a popular culture around the future. But with that, talking about popular culture and participation, I hope all of you will have enough grist for your internal mills to come and ask some questions of Audrey and Ronaldo. Please just come up to the mics.
I'll break the ice. What's up, Rome? I'm Baratunde Thurston. He's an old friend, very young friend, very young friend. Honored to have been captured on a Taiwanese transparency website, as Audrey was in our podcast, How It's a Citizen. And I'm here on a project, Life with Machines. So I want to pick up on the culture and the imagination of a better future. Ruha Benjamin has said very eloquently that we're living inside of other people's imaginations. When we look at the cultural influence, the rising cultural influence of the tech elite in this country, this neo-reactionary, this CEO monarchy drive that people like Mark Andreessen have put out in their techno-optimist manifesto, it's not a techno-diverse manifesto, it's a techno-convergence toward him and his investments. Where do you see a counter opportunity and evidence of an alternative vision for the use of tech?
Can I give a few examples?
Please do, because we all need those examples.
Number one should be Iwaju. I don't know if anyone's seen Iwaju. It's a Disney Plus show that my girls, I have two girls, love. It's made by a Pan-African, primarily Nigeria-based comic book and creative studio jointly with Disney. And it was the first, to my knowledge, mainstream in the West for children, African origin content. And it was all futurism. IWAJU, but there's a bunch of accents that I'm gonna have trouble using the right French word to describe. But it's on Disney Plus. It's wonderful. It's a 5, and it's Kugali Media that makes it. Number 2 is Wild Robot. I don't know if anyone saw that this fall. I think that's probably my favorite children's content, maybe ever. I absolutely loved it. And it's got a very kind, soft, and very counter to the standard tech narrative vision of the future of technology. I also think Star Trek is back, if anyone hasn't noticed. Not all of it is great, in my opinion, but some of it is really fabulous. And I particularly would recommend Strange New Worlds, the new series there, to folks. So I actually think we're seeing something of a renaissance. That was very vibrant when I was young. And as I said, as I sort of grew into adulthood, it was dying out, and I think it's coming back. So that's a source of optimism for me. But I'm sure you all have some examples.
I'd like to hear more questions. I'd also recommend Moraikon, the museum in Japan. I think that's an absolutely incredible place. And I want to go to the one in Brazil. I haven't.
Oh yeah, Brazil has the Museum of Tomorrow in Rio, which it's a very ambitious name. But I think it does this great job. And it's actually very interesting because it's the #1 most visited museum in Brazil and maybe in Latin America. Like it gets visited like by thousands of people.
An incredible physical space as well.
Yes, and it talks about the future. So it's not about the past. It's about things that we can do to basically improve our lives. And I think that's fascinating. There was one philosopher called Stefan Zweig that used to call Brazil the land of the future. And one of the reasons might be the one that I just described, because we do really well with our free time. But the other reason is that Brazil is all about experimentation. We do a lot of things that don't go really well, but there is one thing that we do really fine, which is to experiment with different and new models. So this is actually an invitation for you. If you have an idea that you would like to develop and test, Brazil is the perfect test bed for that. It happened with open source and free software. It happened with Creative Commons in the past. It happened with participatory technologies like wikis and so on. They all caught fire in Brazil. They got really important there. And I think this experimentation nature of the country resonates with our cultural background as well. So what makes Brazil a country is this thing that we call anthropophagia, which means, I can translate it as a sort of a tropical cannibalism, in which we appropriate other tools and we repurpose them in order to achieve different goals and different uses. So I will finish just by quoting William Gibson, not the usual William Gibson quote that you're think that I'm going to say, but another lesser known one, which is, he says that the streets find their own use for things. And I think Brazil is part of those streets, because there's one thing that we do really well is to appropriate tools from a different context and repurpose them in an experimental way inside the country.
And I don't know if Bertrand remembers, but he also emceed the first conference of an organization that Audrey and I serve on the board of. So he's a longtime friend and collaborator. Others, please.
Hi, I'm Rebecca McKinnon from the Wikimedia Foundation. Thumbs up. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the relationship between democracy, human rights, and free speech. There's kind of a debate going on about what free speech means in that context. I think there's been some hijacking of the notion of free speech and what freedom means, and whether it means that you can't have content moderation, we can't have governance, because freedom means anybody can do whatever they want. And so how do you like to talk about and frame what freedom and free speech means, and how we prevent freedom, the concept of freedom and free speech, from leading us to, in political science terms, a Hobbesian state of nature in which life is nasty, brutish, and short for anyone who isn't powerful, rich, and strong. Question for you there.
Yeah, thank you for the great question. We debated that question for an entire week just in Taipei, in Taiwan, in RightsCon. That was like the #1 topic. That's the RightsCon people are now grappling with.
And we did an hour-long podcast on that this morning as well.
We just did that too. And so not to summarize, but just to give some spectrum of thoughts that I gathered from RightsCon conversations. I think Wikipedia is a great example where it's very rare that any speech that's made as an edit on Wikipedia gets censored, as in totally, absolutely removed. It only happened in like clearly illegal cases. The rest, the lawful but awful, are preserved in histories or in the talk page and so on, but they do not surface to people's consciousness that easily, because through its curation and and through its norms, the Wikipedia community prioritizes what we just referred to as the uncommon grounds, the common ground that people from different diverse backgrounds manage to agree on as encyclopedic. The challenge was that there was no such thing for the social media. And social media changed for the worse, I would argue, around 2015 when they switched from a simple like displaying your followers' posts model to a algorithmic model with autoplay, with short form videos, with this maximizing engagement through enragement algorithm that rewards the polarized content that keeps people addicted to their touchscreens, unless they turn their touchscreens grayscale like I do. And so I'm immune, but most people did not. So the enragement was more vivid than the reality around us, and therefore it made it increasingly difficult to rediscover the social fabric that is needed to establish this uncommon grounds. And so a lot of conversations from like Project Liberty Institute hosted a workshop in RiseCon. We talk about the possibilities of an alternate way to do pro-social instead of anti-social ranking on social media algorithms. That is to say, instead of taking anything legal offline, we simply make sure that only the ideas, only the post, only the content that speak to different communities sort to the top in a common way across to all the communities. So it's not individualized feeds that isolates our experiences, but rather shared feeds that's more like community notes. But instead of just debunking something after the fact, it pre-bunks those divisions by servicing the uncommon ground even before the polarization goes viral. We have a lot of experience doing that in Taiwan since 2015, and now there's a new paper co-written by Glen and yours truly and a few others called Pro-Social Media that we're working with Blue Sky, but also with BitChute.
And we're talking to folks from Wikimedia,
And also we have one to, yes, to Wikimedia Foundation. And the hope is that we can then define freedom of speech as the freedom to add more context, more speech, so that it builds the social fabric explicitly as one of its outputs to heal those divides by finding those uncommon grounds and showing people what those uncommon grounds are, instead of removing and hence fueling conspiracy theories using the more traditional, shadow banning and the other moderator tools. So the end result, I think the ideal point is similar, is that we discover shared purpose, but the root is through like more contextual speech instead of less speech through moderation. So that is a snapshot of what we discussed in RiseCon.
Well, I can't wait to cannibalize all that in Brazil.
Of course.
But
Serve.
besides that, there is another point, which is, first thing, we have to support and protect free speech a lot, in the sense that, as I mentioned, Brazil used to be a dictatorship. I was born into it, and I know what not having free speech means. So it's really a core value that has to be protected. The point is, speech is not only about talking, but it's also about listening. And I think what you just described is extremely important, because listening implies someone will say something, we call it a thesis. Someone will rebuff it, we can call it the antithesis. And then the natural outcome would be synthesis, in which one learns from the other and you both advance to something new. We have lost that. We don't have that anymore. So one thing that is important is precisely to build platforms in which people are capable of listening, speaking, and basically advancing in their learnings and understandings of the world. Because what we see a lot right now is basically a weaponization of speech and a destruction of listening. So we have to be careful with that, because then you transform speech only in this task of occupying territory. You don't want to listen to anyone. You want your speech to occupy as many posts and algorithms and platforms as possible. And the result of that is that you have a lot of people talking, and basically only specific isolated communities actually willing to listen to that. And what we need is basically conversations that can cut across these different territories. And I think what you described, at least to me, sounds very exciting.
Yeah, I just maybe to be a little bit spicy in the response and a little pointed, I would say I think it's really important for champions who do care about building common ground and so forth to also really take seriously the free speech discourse and to understand that there's a temptation to reach for kind of non-transparent, centralized content moderation as just like a quick solution to the problem, but it doesn't always actually solve the problem. If it's not accepted as legitimate by the people who you're trying to dissuade from accepting the misinformation, no matter whether you suppress the speech, you haven't succeeded in your goal. You've just suppressed the speech, and you're going to get a reaction, and you're also going to get the misuse of that by other people for those purposes. So it can be harder and slower to do it the right way, the smart way, but I think it's really important for it to be sustainable to try to embrace that. So, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for everything that you all are doing. My name is Lise Parton. I'm the mayor of Casey, South Carolina, and I have used all my time in office to make sure that citizens do know that they have a voice. My daughter actually spent the summer after she graduated high school in Taiwan and absolutely loves it and can't wait to go back. So thank you for all you're doing because that influenced her time there. Would you have one piece of actionable items that we all could take when we go home? Because these are big things. These are broader things that are making a huge difference. But is there anything that we could individually do when we get back home so that we can all feel a little bit more power in our democracy and helping to create that? Thank you.
Yeah, so if you're in a position where you receive hundreds or even thousands of inputs from citizens, one very concrete thing you can try is to use some of the newer sense-making tools. So if you just search for a sense-making tool, there's many open source choices now. And what it does is that it immediately, in just a few seconds, every day, say you have thousands of inputs, it finds the common topic, the uncommon ground, the shared values, as well as what are the main divisions, lines of division. And so what it enables you to do is you can close the loop much more easily. If you reply to those summarized statements and it's always grounded to individual statements, then you can go back to those individual people and say, okay, these lines of your letter to the mayor and so on, this changed my thinking, or there's already a measure that addresses it and so on. And you can afford to do that in a personalized way that was previously not possible, at least not in the individual to individual sense possible. And so that's, I think, very actionable. We use that tool in Taiwan and increasingly in many other places, like in California and Kentucky, as I mentioned as well. So the sense-making tools, I think it's one concrete takeaway. Early on in the pandemic in 2020, we tried something like that, and immediately it surfaced two dividing sides. One saying wearing a mask is like very bad for your health, and the N95, the highest grade mask, is the worst. And the other side saying because of SARS, only N95 works, and every other kind of mask doesn't work. And then it enabled us to find an uncommon ground, which is people widely agreed is a signal to remind people to wash their hands. So within a day, we pushed out this meme of a Shiba Inu, a very cute dog, a Doge dog, putting her paw to her mouth and saying, wear a mask to remind each other to wash your hands and keep your dirty hands from your mouth. And so it just depolarized the entire nation. People who don't wear masks, people who do wear masks, there's no cultural war. And we measure the tap water usage actually just increased. And it enabled us to counter the pandemic for 3 years without locking down any cities. So I think pre-bunking really works, but pre-bunking only works reliably if you have good sense-making tools.
So you heard it here. The first use by a government
of that dog was not advertising a commercial product on a US government website. It was actually preventing people from getting themselves and their neighbors sick. Just two quick suggestions. One is check out our book. It has tons of very concrete, actionable things in it. Number two, one I would really highlight is the Gov0 practice. Very simple thing. Just have the code for your local government websites be open source on a GitHub repo so that students in your high schools can go in for projects for their high school and improve the government websites. And think of what a credential that is for them. Think of what a help it is to have better public services. And there's obviously security reasons you don't do that all at, for every federal service. But for most local government services, that's just a pure benefit,
And just as quick snippet, this is all open source, so you don't have to pay licenses for it. It's just a matter of basically downloading and installing the tool. And if you don't like the tool itself, how it works, you can actually improve the tool itself. So that's why I think this creates a sort of a virtuous circle and you start using them.
If it breaks, you keep those parts.
There, my name is Azra Park. I'm a master's student of economics at University of Toronto, data scientist by trade. With respect to governance, what needs to come first? Is it removing the bureaucracy, or is it the implementation of technology? Because I feel like there's a risk of implementing technology first, that it actually entrenches the possibility of an authoritarian technocratic state. So I'm curious, what comes first?
That's a great question. I think there's technology that are centralizing in nature, such as like opaque machine learning prediction models. And there's technologies much more like the personal computer revolution, where it makes it easier for the civil society to check and balance the government. So it depends on what kind of technology do you roll out. If it's the technology of the decentralizing kind, Vitaly Buterin has a great kind of moniker for it called D/ACC, meaning decentralization, democratization, and defensive acceleration. So basically, for each piece of technology, you can inspect and see like whether it spreads the power more, whether it makes the power more decentralized, and also whether it prioritizes the defense part instead of the offense part. And if it passes all these criteria, then you can invest on this technology without worrying that it increases the centralization risks. So one early example that I can think of is in Taiwan. People worry about the air pollution and they don't trust the Environment Ministry's numbers circa 2014. And so they measure the air quality themselves using air boxes and then later on water boxes and noise boxes and so on. And these citizen science projects use distributed ledgers so that they write on those ledgers and invite governments to also write on the same ledgers, but nobody can cancel each other's numbers. They cannot go back in time and temper it and so on. And over time, it increased the not just the standard for discourse in finding like where does the pollution actually coming from, but also made it very easy to check whether the government is acting on those information that citizen scientists have reported when it comes to environmental enforcement and things like that. And so there's no risk in rolling out this because it helps the bureaucracy to show that it's doing what the citizen wanted to do. So you don't need to remove bureaucracy per se, but you make how bureaucracy works, every step of it, in a publicly accountable way. And so this kind of distributed technologies, I think, particularly suited to rebuild the fabric of trust.
Hi, I'm Erin McNeil with Media Literacy Now. I heard you say pre-bulking, and that's the media literacy scale. I apologize if you've already talked about this, because I came in late, it chose the wrong session. But to what extent can these tech tools improve, or are they improving, citizen media literacy in other countries? And to what extent maybe is the government behind that or in favor of that?
And talk to the Taiwanese example, maybe. Yeah, according to ICCS, the International Civics and Citizenship Standard Study, Taiwanese 15-year-olds are, as of 2022, the top of the world when it comes to the agency they feel like a full citizen. And so the reason why is that in 2019, we switched our curriculum. Before, it was literacy, so media literacy, data literacy, and so on, which is about the individual's ability to comprehend with critical thinking and so on, the incoming information. But in 2019, we switched to what we call a competence. So media competence, data competence. The difference is that literacy is when you consume and competence is when you co-create, when you produce. And so we now, as students, as I mentioned, to measure the environmental levels of pollution, but also fact check the 3 presidential candidates as they're having real-time debates. We also imbue in them the ability to start nationwide citizen petitions. And the most impactful of those petitions, those 15, 16 years old, become cabinet level advisors and so on. So it's like Pygmalion effect, right? You treat them like adults. You put adult responsibilities on them and they become adults. And they become not just adults, but actually people with much more free time than 20-year-olds when it comes to participating in civics life and also building the civic muscle. So I think pre-bunking in particular only works with this kind of organic network. It doesn't work if the government just pre-bunks, the 70-year-olds. But if the 70-year-olds are pre-bunked through their 17-year-olds, grandchildren, that works very reliably. So I think the point here is to make sure that the young people actually lead the way and actually set the agenda and start like citizens initiatives, something we learned from Brazil that empower people younger than 18 years old. Ronaldo, did you like to?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a number of studies that basically show that the number one factor that promotes public participation is the feeling that you are being listened to. So if there is the possibility of building channels that basically take into account the participation that is happening, I think that's the number one incentive. People have tried other incentives as well. They have tried giving people money to participate, giving people lottery tickets to participate. They work, but the most important one is this feeling that you're being listened. And it's very important to start doing that as part of the media literacy education. And Brazil has some interesting examples about that as well. So, for instance, the Itaú Foundation, which Eduardo Saro is here in the audience, they have been doing this amazing training for professors at the public schools and basically teaching them capabilities in order to provide media literacy. And also, not only that, something that is very precious for young kids, which is computational thinking. So start teaching not only programming, but how to think computationally from a very young age. Because you're not only supposed to understand information itself, but you're also supposed to understand how information systems work, including algorithms and how they basically select and curate information. And having that understanding as early as possible, I think helps in the pre-bunking effort that we've been talking about.
Take one last question. Okay, cool. I'm Andrea. My question, and you kind of started to answer this already, but if you have any interesting examples or strategies for overcoming, I think it's kind of, and especially in the US, I will say, like this kind of fragmentation with political participation. There's definitely communities that want to be involved, and you have great examples of like success, but how have you engaged and reached out to people who are either more isolated from the political process, either, geographically, ideologically? There's a number of reasons, but I'm just curious how you guys have overcome that. Thank you.
So when in Taiwan, when we say that we sent 200,000 random SMS messages, most people who received those messages were not politically active to begin with. However, when they found out that they can become like part of a citizens assembly, that they won the lotocracy ticket, then there's again a Pygmalion effect. Like we're imbuing in them the ability to speak on behalf of their basically their neighbors. And so we ensure the resulting 450 people in the Citizen Assembly is statistically representative of Taiwanese society in terms of gender, age bracket, place they live, occupation, so on and so forth. And so I think this kind of mini publics do have a lot of way to activate the civic muscles to anyone who won the lottery, to the lotocracy. And so I would encourage you to consult, there's the Citizen Assembly Guide by Democracy Next, Them Next, that shows not just the worked examples. In particular, I think in Japan, there's many smaller towns that does this for almost a decade now to great effect. And also just to pick some very practical, like non-partisan ideas, and those ideas close to them very quickly, and then get people into the mood of, oh, our idea can be implemented in just 30 days, in just 60 days, and so on. And so instead of just solving one big, large problem, ideological ones, start building those civic muscles. And all those civic muscles can be built in parallel so that people get a hold of those tools. And then in their schools, in their communities, they can also run sense making. They can also work with, for example, the MIT Constructive Communications Lab, Cortico, and so on, that empowers existing in-person conversations.
And I think we're going to need to leave it there, but I'll say obrigado to Ronaldo and Shisha to Audrey, and live long and prosper to you all.
Yeah,